Hello, this is Dr. Greg Goglin, Information Security and Intelligence, Ferris State University. The purpose of this video is to take a database that we designed in Visio and install it in SQL Server. So we're going to take each of these tables and define them in SQL Server. So I'll close out Visio. Now I'm just about to go into SQL Server. Notice that I'm using Windows authentication, so I'm using my Windows login rather than using the security in SQL Server. If I wanted to use a SQL Server authority, I would just use the SQL Server authentication. So once we connect, on the left there are several different areas where we have the ability to expand. In the database area and the security area are two common ones. In the security area is where you can go in and create logins and manage permissions should you decide you want to use SQL Server Authority, or perhaps set up some other things within SQL Server such as groups and so forth. But we are concentrating on defining a database and installing the student database that we just talked about. So I'm going to do a right click on databases, a new database. I will call this new database students. And you will note a few things. One is in the middle here, the students. This is the data portion initially set to 8 meg, which isn't much, but it'll auto grow to an unlimited size. I'll just put that at 50 meg just for the heck of it. The log portion is at 8. It's unusual to have the log and the data portion the same size. These are small allocations that it doesn't really matter much, and they're also set to unlimited. The disadvantage with unlimited is it could spool out and use up the whole disk drive and crash the server. The initial allocations and other initial configurations for a database are taken from a template that we can set up in the model database, which is in the systems database area in the database breakdown. There's a few other tabs you can go into. The options area where you can configure several different things related to your database. The file groups area where you can set up partitions and so forth where the data goes. I'm just going to take the default for everything. So it is creating our students database, and you can see there it is created. Just so you know, in the systems database area, if you open that up, that's where the model is, the master and so forth. The model is the template, so it is okay if you have a purpose and know what you're doing to go in and modify that. The master database you don't want to touch. For the most part, in the systems databases area, you don't want to mess with those things. But let's go into the students database that we've created, and there are no tables, but we can create tables. And let's start out by creating the first one, which let's do the student table. And if you remember, our student table had a student ID and a data type that makes sense for an ID that is a key is an integer. So we can change the drop down to int. It's required, so we do not want to allow nulls. The other two fields we had were last name, which we could use as the default, but that's only 10 characters. The nchar means it's Unicode, which is a double byte character set, which helps you for international applications. Let's just say it's an nvarchar 50. So that's a variable length up to 50 for a last name. We are going to require it, so it's not going to allow nulls. And let's also do the same with the first name. And the first name, we can make that a little shorter, about an nvarchar of 20. And that is also required. So that is our table. We've typed in our column names from Visio. We've added data types. Integers are numbers, and it's a range of values from negative Depends on the release of the database and which DBMS you're using, but like a -2 billion to a +2 billion range. Varchar character data or string data is numbers, special characters, and so forth. Alpha up to 50. So it's kind of a squishy thing that'll stretch up to 50 in width. So we'll save this. So just close it. And it'll ask you for a name. And for our name, we will call it student, our student table. Now, if we go in to our table area, we look, we don't see it. What you can do is do a right click and refresh, and then you'll see your student table. If you go to right click, design, you can go right back to where we were because maybe you made a mistake. And there's probably a couple of things that we would like to do to this. One is to find the primary key, which we can do with a right click, set as primary key. The other is with a student ID, you can have it automatically generate the student numbers. And you can do this for integer fields and numeric data. And if we go down a little ways to this identity specification, we actually have to open that up, and the is identity area, we change that, there's a drop down over to the right, to yes. Increment by 1, identity seed 1. That means that it starts at 1, and the next record you add is going to be a 2 and a 3 and a 4 for the student ID. If you put the increment at 10, it would, the first one would be 1, then 11, then 21, and so forth. This way, it's just automatically generated. It helps prevent duplicates and things like that. So we'll be more in depth with those types of things later, but for now, we're all set with the student table, so we can save out. If you get this saving changes is not permitted, that's because there is a standard that says you have to do things a certain way, and the initial setup for SQL Server has that held pretty tightly to that standard. And so you would need to drop and recreate the table, which means delete it and start over. Well, we don't want to go through that all the time. One of the things you can do in Management Studio is go in and change the options and configuration of the way certain tools operate and the way certain things are enforced in SQL Server. So if you go into Tools, Options, into the Designers Table and Database Designers area, there's this Prevent Saving Changes that require table recreation. That is what just tripped us up, and by default that is turned on. I'm going to turn that off because we're in a test environment, and it's just going to be a lot easier for us to get work done. In a production corporate environment, that might be a problem, but we're not in a production corporate environment. We're just trying to get things done quickly. We can now go back into our student table, back into the designer, change that primary key. Also, we can go down to where that identity area is, or the index specification, identity, into the second one is identity, change it to yes, starts at 1, increments by 1. Okay, we're all set. So now we can save out, and then we can begin to create our other tables. So I'll create one more table. You have the course ID, and course ID is probably something that we also want to be numeric, so it'd be an integer. If you type the letter I, it'll go to integer right away. Again, it's required. Keys are always required, so don't allow nulls. Then we can have the course name, which varchar is a good way to start. Let's go to nvarchar Take the 50, but I'm gonna cut it down to 30. Again, you've got to have a name, and we can go to Visio and double check what all of our columns are if we want. So we need a course description and a professor ID. Course description, again, we go with an nvarchar. Descriptions maybe could be a little bit longer, so we'll go with the 50. And we'll say that just for examples for later on, we'll say it's not required to have a description. And we'll also put in the professor ID. And this would have to match the data type, or it should match the data type in the professor table, which we haven't created yet, but we'll just remember it's going to be an integer. If we leave this blank, that means you can create a course that does not have a professor. Well, if you think about it, a lot of times courses are created and you don't know who's going to teach them yet. So we're going to allow no for that for now. Let's set the course ID to a primary key. And this one I'm not going to make an identity. So I'll leave that alone. And let's close it. And we'll save it as a course table. And again, it's not going to show up here until we do the refresh. Now we can see we have a student and a course. And you can also open these twisties to see the column names and keys and so forth. So that is the first two tables. I'm going to type in the rest of them, and then I will come back into the video and we'll talk about a few more things.